Hello, I'm Kristen Bolden, and welcome to The Other Side of History. Before we get started in this talk, I would like to make a correction. Now, in our talk on Dynuth and King Arthur, I said that King Oswald, who is the king there of Northumbria, was the father of the next king, who was King Oswy. Now, Oswy was the next king after Oswald, but Oswy, he was not the son, but he was the brother of King Oswald. So Oswald, he actually died in 642 in battle, and he was succeeded by his brother, Oswy. Now, in Daubionet's History of the Reformation of the 16th century, he talks about these two brothers. They were both the sons of a heathen and cruel father. Both of these young princes had been compelled actually to take refuge there in Scotland at the school there of Iona. And Daubionet says that Oswald had acquired the language of the country, and after being instructed in the truths there of the Holy Writ, he was converted and he was baptized into the Scottish Church. I guess Oswald, he just loved to sit at the feet of the elders there at Iona and to listen to their words. Now, when Oswald became king and he joined up with Aidan, if you remember our talk on Aidan, who did the evangelizing there of the people there in Northumbria. And Daubionet says that Oswald received Aidan as an angel from heaven. Because Aidan was actually ignorant there of the Saxon language. King Oswald, he would accompany him everywhere, standing by his side and interpreting his gentle discourses. The people, they would crowd around joyfully, and they would listen eagerly to the word of God. The king was a generous man, and was especially animated with tender compassion towards the poor. Now, many times he would take off his own cloak to cover the nakedness of one of his brethren. One day, when he was about to take his seat there at the table, he was informed that a crowd of his subjects, and they were complaining of hunger, they had collected before his palace gates. Instantly, he ordered that the vessels that stood before him and all the food that had been prepared to be carried out and to be distributed amongst them. And he actually took these vessels that were silver, and he broke them into pieces and commanded that his servants divide these silver pieces amongst the poor. Now, King Oswald's last prayer was for his people. After receiving a mortal wound, he fell there and exclaimed, "Lord, have mercy on the souls of my people." So Oswald's brother, Oswy, had also been instructed in the free doctrine of the Britons. But his religion, Daubionet says, it was of an external nature. His heart actually overflowed with ambition, and he shrank from no crime that he had to commit in order to increase his power. He was jealous of a relative of his, and this relative was King Oswald. And he was a very amiable king, this King Oswald, and he was loved by his people. But Oswy, he was jealous of him, and he marched against him at the head of an army. Now, King Oswald, he desired to prevent bloodshed, and so he took shelter there with a chief, and he actually had loaded many, many favors upon this chief. But the chief, he led Oswy's soldiers right to his hiding place. And it was actually in the dead of night that the fugitive king was basely assassinated. Now, Columba's spiritual headquarters there in England had been Whitby, Northumbria. So Whitby is remembered in history because of a woman, and her name was Hilda. and she was actually of royal descent. Now, from the age of 13, Hilda was known for her piety and consecration to the Christian faith. When the Roman Bishop Augustine, whom we've already talked about, the one that was sent to evangelize England, when he was in power there, Hilda actually left the country for a time. And then when the king, the good King Oswald, there took the throne, she returned to Northumbria and undertook the building of a Bible seminary there at Whitby. Now, if you heard that talk on Aidan and other religious men there of the Celtic Church, they knew Hilda, and they honored her work. Hilda was said to be wise, and that her heart was in the service of God. The leaders in the Celtic Church, they would frequently visit her, and they would instruct her there in the doctrines. Now, because she had the reputation of being wise, there was even kings and princes that would come to her, and they would ask and receive Hilda's advice. One historian says that Hilda was a professed enemy to the extension of the papal jurisdiction there in England, and she opposed with all her might the tonsure of priests, which is like the monk's head there, being left bare at the top by the shaving off of the hair. So she opposed this. She also opposed the celebration of Easter according to the Roman ritual. Now, when the seminary was established there at Whitby, Hilda, she insisted that this seminary was under efficient and scholarly discipline. It was a very large establishment, and it was actually divided into two separate divisions. There was one for men, and the other was for women. She encouraged that much attention was to be given to the reading of the Bible and the learning of the truths that were within God's holy word. Now, 5 of the graduates of her school actually became provincial directors. And also from this school, the world was given the first of English religious poets, and his name was Caedmon. And we're actually going to talk about him in our next talk. So a great enemy to the Celtic Church was a man by the name of Wilfrid. Now remember that after King Oswald died, his brother Oswy became the next king of Northumbria. So Oswy had married a princess of the Roman faith, and Wilfrid was the queen's chaplain. Wilfrid had been sent to Rome, where for actually 4 years he had been drilled in the arguments and traditions that were designed to spread Roman authority. When he returned there to Northumbria, it was with the purpose of forcing the Celtic Church to come into line with the papal practices. A public debate was arranged where Wilfrid hoped to bring about a decision that was in favor of the papacy. Oswy was now king, and Wilfrid desired to force the Celtic Church to come in line with these papal practices. A number of the leaders in the Celtic Church were there, as well as Hilda and her followers. The king, Oswy, and his queen, and their son, the prince there of Northumbria, they were all there. Wilfrid artfully brought the debate around to the supremacy of Peter. Wilfrid shouted, "As for you and your companions, you certainly sin if, having heard the decrees of the Apostolic See and of the Universal Church, you refuse to follow them. For though your fathers were holy, do you think their small number in the corner of the remote island," referring to Iona, "is to be preferred before the universal church of Christ? And if that Columba of yours was a holy man and powerful in miracles, yet could he be preferred before the most blessed Prince of the Apostles, to whom our Lord said, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And to thee I will give the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So the king, Oswy, he actually asked one of the Celtic church leaders if the words that had been spoken were true. The response showed the fallacy and the weakness of using the incidents of the keys as a basis for church supremacy. However, in the end, the king, he crumbled under the pressure. There was a new line of kings that had arisen, and they were giving power to the papacy. With the queen also being of the Roman faith, it only added to the strength of the papal cause. The next 4 centuries were dark times for the Celtic Church. However, the seeds that had been sown, though dormant, they were not lifeless. The faith represented by the Celtic leaders, it remained powerful there in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and the southwestern part there of England. Followers of the truth, they persisted down through the centuries, so that when Wycliffe, he began his marvelous revival that was centuries later, his followers were some of those who had maintained this faith from generation to generation. It was in Scotland that Columba had established the famous school there on the island of Iona. However, eventually a change happened when the Scottish king Malcolm III took the throne. Now, up until 1058 AD, the Scottish Church remained largely as it had been, which was a pure church with a pure faith, and modeled by men like Columba. But when the king Malcolm III was crowned, there was a fierce struggle that took place. The king, he took a girl by the name of Margaret as his second wife. Margaret was a member of one of the royal houses, former royal houses there of England, and she had royal blood. However, instead of living in the palace of her birth, her desire was to be a nun and to live in a nunnery. She was a devout Catholic, and it took some of the ablest men of the papal church from England to convince her to renounce her plan to become a nun and to marry the king. Now, King Malcolm was passionately devoted to Margaret because she had made this sacrifice for him. So in becoming queen, Margaret, she determined to make the Scottish church the church of the monarchy instead of the church of the people. Margaret, she possessed a keen intellect and a strong memory, and also a readiness in the subtleness of expression. She had been trained in the defense of the papal doctrine, and she also brought with her many monastic scholars who were there to protect her against the attacks from the Celtic Church. Now remember, the Celtic Church at this time, it remained unpolluted by papal falsehoods. When Margaret came to Scotland, she arrived in grandeur. She was young and beautiful, and on her person there was an abundance of rubies and diamonds. She arrived in the largest vessel that had ever been seen on their shores. However, these Celtic Christians, they placed a greater value upon the grace of God and the Holy Scriptures than upon the Queen's display. She was not able to destroy the memory of Columba and also the scriptures that he had taught. She could also not destroy the many wonderful deeds that Columba had done for the cause of truth. Now remember, Columba had set up many schools and churches for the Celtic faith. He had copied 300 New Testaments with his own hands. At this time, 500 years had already passed with the death of Columba, but there was still a strong love for him in both England and Scotland. The Celtic people could not and they would not forget the beautiful truths which Columba had taught. Margaret, being Roman, did not respect religious liberty, And finally, she was able to get religious legislation passed, which enforced both Easter and Sunday. The king's love for his queen let him place actually full power of the state behind Margaret. It was Margaret who took full charge there of the religious affairs in Scotland. Of course, she had instruction and help from some of the very ablest men of the papal church. For the next 3 centuries, the Church of Columba was placed in a dark shadow. However, the glory of Columba was not destroyed. Margaret might as well have attempted to degrade the Apostle Paul himself. And perhaps this is why, even today, Rome actually tries to make Columba the hero of Rome instead of the church in the wilderness. Already passing legislation, which enforced the keeping there of Easter and Sunday, Margaret now insisted in the further joining of the church with the state. Like Constantine, she joined together that which Christ had put asunder. She began with a Sunday law and then proceeded in the demolition of the Celtic church. This is one of the strategies of Rome. They enforce Easter and Sunday in the attempt to choke the life out of a liberty-loving church. There is a saying that no religion ever has been destroyed by persecution if the people confessing it were not destroyed. The Christianity there of Columba stayed alive, even though eventually they did have to go into hiding to escape persecution. Just as Columba, King Oswald, Aidan, and Hilda, they stood as light bearers in their time. So we are called to be light bearers in our time. Let's not shirk back, but by God's grace, let's stand for the truth, as others have also stood for the truth in the past. So I just want to thank those of you who have subscribed and have pushed that like button and made comments. Your encouragement is very much appreciated. And I would just like to further encourage you to subscribe and click on that like button and make comments. And I want to thank you for listening, and God bless.